Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, we're going to do just a quick sound check. Lee, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Jesse?
Yep.
Rich? Rich, can you hear me? Let's check on Rich. Give us just a minute to make sure that we have all hands on deck before we start. Rich, are you with us yet? Try again. Rich, are you there? Okay, we have Lee, we have Jesse, we have not Rich. I'm not sure if we can try to get him in as we start. We appreciate everybody's time and don't want to hold things up, so we're going to get started. Welcome to Madeira USA's first webinar of 2018. My name is Alice Wolf. I'm the Manager of Education and Publications, and I'm joined at Madeira USA headquarters in New Hampshire by our marketing team. Remotely, we've got Lee Caroselli Barnes in California. We've got Jesse Elliott in Washington. And we're going to cross our fingers and hope that we've got Rich Medcraft in Oregon. Rich, are you there? No. Okay, we are going to. Sorry, Lee.
It looks like he's offline from what I can see.
He might be trying to get back on, so we'll.
Okay, so we'll.
Okay.
Keep going. Let me let the people that have just joined us know that we tried something new with this webinar. Rather than asking you to send your questions in real time, we asked all registrants to send in a question as they register to attend the webinar. We felt that it would be enlightening for us to see what direction our customers wanted to go in, and it was amazing the response that we got as far as numbers. Over 50% of the people that registered sent in a question, which literally gave us hundreds of questions to go through. So that kind of slowed us down a little bit, but we did have to go through the questions, put them into categories, and also prioritize. So you won't see, I don't think, the question box that you normally would. We're going to ask people to hold off on questions, to send any new ones. And if you have sent in a question with your registration, we hope that you see that pop up, that it's covered by our speakers when we get to that subject. What we did, we also invited registrants to send in pictures of designs that they might be struggling with or have gotten to a point where they couldn't get it to be any better and needed some help. And we gave one of each of those to each of our three, hopefully each of our three people that are joining us today, and asked them to work specifically with that customer in order to produce one outstanding result. I think that in going through the way that they reach that, many questions will be answered. I will mention that some of the questions asked about specific recommendations. What software is the best? What machine should they? And that is something that obviously we can't go into in something like this. But I think that in talking to the subject that you've sent in, you're most likely to get some answers. So we're not accepting questions now because we have so many that everybody that is participating in the webinar agreed it would literally take 2 weeks to answer all of the questions. I also want to tell you that there are 4 special offers. We have 3 speakers. Rich, are you with us now? Not yet. Okay, we're hoping that Rich Medcraft will join us before we get too much farther. And Madeira USA, Lee, Jesse, and Rich all have a special offer that will be sent to you after the webinar. We hope that you will let us know what you think of this method. It was a totally different way, a different approach for us. We were pleased with the results. We hope that you are, but please let us know if you're not. And I also wanted to point everyone in the direction of our gallery of digitizers. This is yet another service that Madeira USA is offering our customers. It is on Madeira USA. On the Madeira USA site, up at the top, there is a drop-down category called Services, and Gallery of Digitizers is the first tab there. All of the 3 people that you hopefully will hear from today are listed there. If you're looking for a digitizer, it's a great place to go to. If you are a digitizer, make sure that you go there and go all the way down to the bottom and see if you'd like to join up with us. So very quickly, again, we are recording this webinar. It will be available to everyone. So if you have to if you want to refer back to it, you will. The printable slides from the webinar will be available to everyone. There are 4 specials, and our gallery of digitizers, these are all links that will be sent to you in an email that will follow. So one thing, again, that I just want to touch on very briefly, because of the number of questions that came in, we chose seven topics that we were going to talk about. But I also wanted to let people know that we've been doing webinars for about 6 years. The people that are talking to you today have been doing this for a very, very, very long time and have individual seminars and things that they can help you with. These are just some pictures of different areas where we already have recorded webinars that we've done with Lee, where we did one whole webinar about nothing but blending and shading. We did a webinar with Rich and Eric Campbell on small lettering and fine detail. Jesse maintains a blog on his website with Ignition Drawing. Lee at Balboa Threadworks has offers there as well. And on our own Madeira USA, we have videos, we have recorded webinars, we have instruction sheets. So I encourage you to, if you like what you're hearing and you want to learn more, it's very, very easy to do that. So what topics will we be covering today with the people that we have? Here is a list and the people that will be addressing these, hopefully. We took, as I said, literally hundreds of questions, categorized them, and tried to talk to our webinar people in order to get a variety of topics that were the most frequently seen. How do I begin? Where do I start? How do I choose software? Lee is going to be addressing that question. Digitizing for performance wear, that is an area that, even though performance wear has been around for a while, it's something that is still a struggle for many embroiderers, so Rich will be talking to that. 3D or puff embroidery, especially on caps, is very, very trendy. It's a style that embroiderers have to keep up with, so Jesse will be addressing that. Blends, shading, and gradients, areas where your embroidery can set you apart from your competition. We will be speaking to that. Achieving small lettering and detail on corporate logos is an area that Rich has specialized in, and he'll be talking about that. And a lot of questions came in on underlay, when to use it, where to use it, how to use it. So Jesse has that to speak to. And then at the end, hoping that we have enough time, and we're trying desperately not to go over an hour, but we just may have to. At the end, we've asked Jesse, Lee, and Rich to send in some really great examples of what they've done, and they will talk to those images about how they organized, how they decided how to begin, and I think that you'll enjoy seeing those. So please stay with us for the entire hour. And at this point, thank you for your indulgence, and I will happily turn this over to Lee. We'll get started. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. First thing that we're going to talk about is getting started and selecting your software. As Alice said, we can't tell you exactly what to buy, but we can tell you what to look for. Your software has to be user-friendly. In other words, when you start working with that software and you bring up a group of stitches, you want to be able to have complete control. If you move a node, you want the stitches to follow. You do not want software that requires you to go in and edit it stitch by stitch. So that would be the first thing I'd look for. Second thing is, within your software, you have to be able to take control of those stitches. If you have a running stitch, you have to control the length. If you have satin or column stitches, you want to control the width and also the density and your underlays. And when you get to the fill or tatami, you want to be able to, on the fill or tatami, control the length of the stitch, the density of the stitch, the pattern of the stitch, and also the underlay. There should be a central area in your digitizing software that you can go to that instantly lets you do this. The next thing is your keyboard lettering. Especially when you're starting out, that lettering has to be perfect. You do not want to go back in and try and edit it. So look at the quality of that keyboard lettering. Look at the expanse of it. How many alphabets do they have for you? Can you use it right out of the box or not? And then one of the most important things is your support and training. There is a difference between support and training. Support means that those people that sold that software to you should be there to actually install it, help you install it, and to troubleshoot if there's anything wrong with the software. Training is learning how to use the software to digitize with it. Your support team may go so far as to show you what tools you have, but your trainer has to teach you how to do the digitizing using those tools. There is a big difference between someone in support who doesn't digitize and someone that is training you who does digitize. So look at the trainer, look at what they've digitized in the past, get an idea of what they do, and see if that's what you want to learn to do. And that's the person you should be looking at for the training. The next thing on the next slide is, does your program allow you to work with vector art, JPEGs, and bitmaps? A lot of us are getting very strongly into the vector art. For the realistic designs, you're going to need JPEGs or bitmaps. You should be able to bring them all in to that program and use them as a template. Does it have automatic digitizing? Can you scan something in and turn it to stitches? And how good are those stitches? Can you use part of it and then edit the rest of it? That's important. And one thing you're going to find is that when you have files come in that have been previously digitized, and you will have this happen, you need to be able to read those files. So, does your new software offer the ability to read any file, and is it going to be flexible? Can you read it and then edit it? Most important, know what you need for your business and know how to ask for it.
Anything, Jesse or Rich, anything to add to what Leah's just talked about? If not, Rich, we're up to performance wear, if you'd like to take this topic. And no. Lee or Jesse, would one of you like to step in? And
I could.
I'll try to.
Okay.
I'll step in.
Okay, Jesse, why?
With performance wear, it's a very stretchy fabric, as most of you guys know, and so there's several other than just hooping. There's several other things you have to worry about. You want to prepare the art, simplify and remove excess detail. You always have to think about push and stuff because this fabric moves around easily. So simplifying the design is going to help with that. Lighten densities
Can
as
anybody
much
hear
as
me?
possible.
Oh, Rich.
Oh, hey, yay!
I can barely hear anything, so I don't know where we are, and my page doesn't show where we're supposed to be, I think.
Okay, well, welcome.
I'm not sure how to.
Rich, can you hear me?
Yeah, barely.
Okay, well, we're up. Lee has just talked about where to get started with purchasing software, and Jesse was just covering for you for performance wear, and we are on slide number 6, just beginning the topic, if you'd like to go ahead.
Okay, well, I'm still at getting started in software on my. I don't know what to do. I'm sorry about that.
Okay, Jesse or
So,
Rich,
Rich, you can
want to get continue with performance wear? Slide number 6.
so should I continue?
Yeah, why don't you?
Yeah, I guess I'm not
Okay,
going to be able
so
to help you.
you want to lighten densities as much as possible, and this is kind of both with underlay and the top stitching. Avoid fill stitch directions that challenge the fabric bias, and what that means is there's certain areas that are going to stretch more, so it's going to pucker more if you go like at an angle or something like that. So kind of get used to like what looks good, what doesn't. Keep fill stitch lengths under 4 millimeter. Long stitches pull and distort more, and that means the length of the fill stitch, that area of like from distance to distance of points, reduce that just a little bit, and that'll help. Avoid curved fills. That means like if you're doing like a ring and it's going around, make it just go in one direction rather than around that circle. So from bottom up, inside out, and avoid trapping material. Once again, since it's really stretchy, if you trap the material, it's just going to buckle up right inside it. So you tend to want to stay away from going all around and then going from outside to inside. Use crosshatch underlay or layered fills to minimize fabric stress. And that's like a fill stitch that's open and going one direction and then going the opposite direction on top of that. And this is crisscrossed. Final pressing at the finish to relax the stitches. Pretty much if you press it, it'll just help kind of flatten it a little bit. Avoid stretching garment when hooping, and that's the big stress of like, I mean, you don't want it too tight or too loose. And usually what I do when I hoop it is I run my finger on that fabric, and if it pushes out quite a bit in front of that finger, it's too loose. And it's pretty obvious to see if you've got it too tight. You'll just kind of see outside of it that it's not quite the same angle and everything. Next slide. And so slide 1 shows the puckering and pulling due to trap fabric. I don't know too much about this, so unfortunately, let's see. I'm trying to see what direction it's going and everything, but it looks to me like
I
it
think
did the
that,
white first, and
yeah, what we're trying to
yeah,
show, the two pictures on the left are showing the puckering. It's a little hard to see in a photograph how the two serpents
right,
created that.
yeah, and the puckering is due, like in this instance, it looks like it's due to like the white going first, and then it's already kind of push stuff towards one side, and then the green going on top is going to possibly another direction. Unfortunately, I can't really see that too well to know that.
Jesse, is this what
And a
you're
lot of that can also be due to the improper underlay in the cases on the left.
is what we're seeing on the left? Is that the potato chip thing that I've heard mentioned before, where the stitching is so heavy for the fabric that it just curls up?
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's oftentimes it's due to improper underlay, like maybe a little thin on the, like not doing a crisscross, but just like one thing of underlay, one fill,
Okay.
and then going denser on the top stitching to cover that up. And the more dense you go, the more push you're going to have. But on the right, it also looks like it could be partly due to bad hooping too. But all right, next slide.
Jesse,
And
if you're having
this is a
trouble
good
seeing the
example.
picture, sorry, on the left, there is, you can see some flagging in the fabric.
Yeah.
So,
And this happens like sometimes, like when you have it hooped, it looks normal when it's been embroidered. And once you unhoop it, everything snaps back. And so all that stretchy fabric is coming back, and it has to go somewhere, and it just can't go where it originally was, which was where the embroidery is. And that's what happens when you stretch it too tight. Next.
okay, now
Hey, it's me.
it's your turn, Jesse, talking about 3D or puff embroidery.
Okay. So I'm talking about the traditional type of puff embroidery where you use foam and then stitch on top of it. There's different kinds of different heights of foam available: 2 millimeter, 3 millimeter, and 6. What I really highly recommend for most of you guys, don't stack the foam. If you want thicker ones, don't take 2 or 3 layers of the 2 millimeter. It'll move. It'll just cause you headaches. It's wrong. Choose simple shapes like columns. And what I mean is, don't do a really elaborately shaped image that looks good in fill stitch, but won't look good in foam. Pretty much you have to use satin stitch for foam to work. Fill stitch will flatten it out, and it'll be like not having any foam anyways. So you just, the simpler like columns like letters or script is going to work best. Stitching must be dense enough to perforate foam. Typically, I'll do about 0.2 millimeter to 0.18 millimeter spacing. And that's about half the amount of normal spacing for satin stitching. And what that does is it cuts that foam. So next slide. Cap the ends. And wherever like a column ends, there's going to be that blunt area that the foam is still sticking. So before you do the top stitching, you have to use what's known as caps, which I'll show soon. Digitize any flat parts first because you have to lay down that foam. You can't really like go and stitch on top of it after you've already done the 3D. It won't look good. And you'll need to create a placement line in some cases, and definitely tack down for the foam, which, next slide. Okay, so this is the process of the digitizing. The first one shows digitizing a simple outline. I'm doing the outline first because that's going to be the flat part. And then I create a tack down, since this is obvious of like that the placement line, you know where the foam is going to go, so you don't really need a placement line in this case. So second picture shows the tack down that I'm doing just to hold that foam in place. You might want to tape it down on the corners to keep it from moving up and down when the needle goes. Cap the joints and the ends. And with capping, with pictures 3 and 4, it shows the capping, and it's basically just a dense satin stitch, but it has to be ragged on the inside and sharp on the outsides. So you can kind of see in number 4 that it's I used a jagged edge on the inside part, and it's sharp on the top and bottom edges, the outer parts. And then finally you do your top stitching, and in this case I used a little bit of split stitch up on the top of the A because it was a little too long. You also want to be aware that the longer the satin stitch, each embroidery machine has different parameters that causes it to trim, so you don't want to go past that width. You also want to have some jump stitches if it's pretty long anyways, so it doesn't snag. So next. We have, this is to show kind of like the process when you actually embroider. So unfortunately, I didn't realize it, but it doesn't really show the important part on the outline, the very first one. I have a little point between the second and third stop, that little triangle indicating that I made it, made the machine stop between that point. So picture 2 shows a tack down. Picture 3 shows a capping, and then the column of the horizontal line in the A. And then you finally have the perforated, completely perforated foam that you can just pull off, and you might want to use a heat gun to make that foam shrink a little bit. There might be little points in the corners and stuff that will stick out. Sometimes you have to use a pin and push that in. It's a heavy process. It's quite a bit of work, but it can get you a nice result.
Jesse, thank you. What we're going to do now is take a look at one of the images that was sent in to us. This was a person, Lee, I think this was someone named Mike. I think he was from California. I'm not certain.
Yes, he is. Mike from California.
Mike from California was struggling a little bit with this Matheson gasoline company logo. And what you see on the screen now, on the left is the original piece of art that was sent to him, and on the right is what he came up with. He wasn't satisfied with it. He sent it in with a question of regarding blending and shading. We turned it over to Lee, and she worked directly with him. So, Lee, if you could share your experience, that'd be great.
Well, first of all, this is not an easy design, and Mike did a great job in taking it apart, but there were a couple of steps that he missed along the way, and I'm hoping that I can give you all some input on what those steps are. If we go to the next slide. One of the things when we're talking about blending, and this is a blend and a very complicated blend, the direction of the stitches is very, very important. Everything has to go the same direction in order for it to blend. If the layers of stitches that you're putting down go different directions, they will not blend. Each successive layer will sit up on top of the layer under it. and you won't get the nuances of color that you need. Density of stitches is really, really important. When I first started doing blending, I thought I could take 100% density of each color, marry it together, and get something good. It doesn't work that way. If I am going to put layers of stitches down that are different colors and I want them to blend correctly, I have to address my density. I have to lighten that density. Length of stitch is also important. If it's a longer stitch, you're going to get a pulling action that makes that blend fill in more, because the more it pulls, the more it fills in, and the stronger that color will be. So you want to use a consistent stitch. I like something
Yes.
about 10% less.
Had something and then it disappeared.
We hear you, Rich.
Excuse me. I like to use a length on the stitch that's about 10% less than the default. Layers, if you're going to have 3 colors, you need 3 layers. When you finish each layer, you should be, in that color, you should be ready to go into the next layer. So you're looking at closest join. So if the first layer runs down, then the second layer would start where the first layer left off, and it would run back up and then back down for the third layer. Color, when we're looking at color, we're going to want to work within color families for these blends. When you look at the Madeira color card, you'll see that your colors are arranged that way. So if you're going to use a selection of blues, going from light to dark, and add greens, you'll want to look at the color card and select from there. And of course, compare it to the original art. Okay. That gives you some parameters. This is the original art. And as you can see, we brought it up a little bit bigger so we could see what was going on. I see in the center here a bright area of white. This is what makes this look rounded. The other colors are drifting off. They're a little bit darker, and we get a feeling of a 3-dimensional ball here. We want to maintain that as we put the stitches down. First color we're going to put down is our white, and you'll see it stitching. And we go with the layer that is, or the first layer is where the white is most intense, and you can see where it ended. We started the next layer, and now we're going to the third layer, and you can see how the color mounts up and becomes more and more intense. When we finish the white, we're jumping over to the turquoise. In this case, there's no underlay because I want some of these things to blend, but I will be walking through the design using my running stitch, which will give me the underlays that I need to separate my colors and keep everything clean. Here, we're going back up with the turquoise, picking the areas that we know we need to make more intense, coming back in with more turquoise. We're actually leaving an area where I'm going to put in a darker shade of turquoise and not putting anything down immediately in that area, so that when I come back in with this darker color that you see here, it will be sandwiched between shades of turquoise and ultimately the shades of green that we're using. Here you can see we're building this up, 3 layers of green. I jump over, that's the only trim, jump over there to another layer of the green, and I come back up with my darker blue, coming back down with 1 layer, and back up. And notice how, as I end, I'm going into that next layer. And in this case, I'm bringing this down with a third layer to make that a little more intense. Now that will give me 4 layers in some areas. This is a very forgiving technique, and you'll find that you can add layers without making it cardboard. Finally, we're going back over the dark blue with the turquoise and with the green. And notice how I had a running stitch there to keep that green clean. That was not an underlay, that was an actual manual running stitch. So this is what I got with this particular piece. The stitch out came out pretty clean. I'm pretty proud of it. It looks better in person than it does on the screen, but the outcome of this whole thing is that we were able to match what they sent in. The right-hand version next to the logo is also the stitch version. I think that looks a little bit better, but blending, again, is going to be something that is dependent on layering, dependent on making sure you leave enough room for each color that you're adding, that the colors aren't fighting for room. And you will find that if you use a wide open fill, that your needle will put the stitches between the lines, because physically you cannot put a stitch on top of a stitch. So we're able to blend without offsetting anything, and we're actually utilizing what the machine wants to do instead of fighting it. There are other blends, and I think if we go to the next slide, you can see this cigar label. And if you look at the background very closely, you'll see at the top it is really intensely red, and it actually fades off to less and less stitches as it gets toward the bottom. As it opens up, you can see that the black background is coming through, and you get a very beautiful blend utilizing the background. This saves stitches. It also gives you a real clean area for your small lettering, as you see, and it keeps everything within that design pristine. So all of your detail sits nicely on top of that blend. Both techniques are great techniques to learn. One requires software that allows that accordion blend, as it's called, or the graduated blend. The other one is where we're doing 3 layers, is one that can be done on any software as long as you are able to adjust the length of that stitch and the density of that stitch in your fill. So again, 2 different ways to blend and shade. There's a lot more to the technique than I'm able to go into here, and I hope you'll all look at adding this to your bag of tricks, because it is going to give your work something very special.
Thank you, Lee. And looking at our next slide, at this point, I think we've given up on Rich joining us. I don't know what kind of internet problem that was, but one thing that I've learned over the years of looking at the work of Lee and Rich and Jesse is that with their knowledge and their talent and their capability, they have the ability of making the impossible possible. And this was the next example that we got from one of our customers. They sent in originally a piece of artwork that was not as clear as this. This was the Bromley Local Foods Campus, and they were struggling with getting this logo digitized. And so they sent it to us. We sent it on to Rich, and he did some work on it. One of the things that he did, and Lee, would you want to talk about this? We've got some of the bullets that Rich put together, or is this something that you feel comfortable with?
No, I'm comfortable with it. Rich is probably the expert here, but I will do my best. What he is suggesting is that when the design comes in, evaluate that design, measure the column widths and your small openings. These are very important things. You may have to adjust the lettering to make digitizing easier. As a digitizer, you're copying what's in front of you. So when you do make those adjustments, you'll want to make the adjustments in the art, and you'll also want to get the okay from the customer. In your underlay, if you're talking about a small letter, the most you can afford is a center run. When it gets really, really small, you're going to want to depend on the pulling of those stitches to make the letter pristine, which means as it gets smaller, you want to widen the column, lighten the density, let those stitches pull in and fill in. In that case, you're avoiding doing any kind of underlay. 60 weight thread is really important for these smaller letters. 60 weight is 25% thinner than our regular thread. 70 weight even thinner. You'll have to set the appropriate densities, but if the thread is thinner and you use a smaller needle, you can get a smaller column. It's as simple as that. And with the 60 weight and an 8 for your needle, you're looking at 25% smaller on your lettering naturally, just by what you're using as equipment. When you put small letters over fills, whenever I'm doing a fill, I'm doing a layered fill, which still allows for you to have really clean lettering on top of it. When you're talking about your small letters, look at the direction of that fill. Make sure that they're going to stand up. If those stitches are going a direction opposite or different than the angle below it, they will stand up. If those columns are going the same direction, they will sink in. So keep that in mind. Closest point is also very important, just as it was in the digitizing for that fill that I did, the blend. You want to finish that letter and start the next letter. You want to avoid the trims for a cleaner look. One of the things that I think is really important is if you can take that trim, go the same direction for the trim or that stitch that should be trimmed. If you have a layered fill and have it go the same direction, then that will sink in. You won't see it. You won't have to trim it. This is a great little tip that can save time and keep everything really looking clean. Block fonts work best. When you start getting into the really pretty fonts that drift off to nothing and really narrow stitches, you have more problems. So if you are going to pick a font for your customer, the block is going to be the best.
Thank you, Lee. This is just a gathering of what Morgan pulled from some of the art that Rich went through. One of the first things that Lee mentioned and that Rich would mention would be that when you look at the original art that's brought in by your customer, what has to stay and what can possibly be eliminated. One of the best examples here is that the original art, all the way at the left, had the www before the website, before the URL of their website, and in Rich's final version, he was able to eliminate that, but to incorporate the actual website. So if you look at the final version of what Rich was able to come up with, on the right, you see a beautifully digitized and stitched out Bromley Farm logo. The original art that he was working with on one side and the stitch out on the other. And now we are going to switch over to Jesse, who also was working with one of our customers. And Jesse, you were working with somebody on the Rocky Mountain promotional products and apparel logo. Can you share your
Yeah,
experiences?
this was Dee Dee's, and she was working on performance wear and was getting a lot of puckering. And I found out actually later that a lot of the puckering was after the washing. So some distortion was happening there. But so if we go to the next slide, we'll talk about underlay first. What does underlay do? It helps stabilize the garment. It can create loft and prevent the top stitching from sinking into the pile of the fabric, or even sinking into the fill stitch below or something. It can provide clean edges and also make top stitching appear more dense. You always want to consider the fabric type for the density of the top stitching, and and type of top stitching, and the size of like the column stitches and all of this. Like a real thin column stitch is not going to be able to take a whole bunch of underlay, such as the small lettering. You just want the 1 to 2 center runs. But the wider it gets, the more underlay it may require. Density of the underlay too can change depending on the fabric type. Heavy pile, fleece, towels, and heavy knits all will want a little more density in that underlay. And terminology differs by software, which we'll see, I believe, in the next slide. So I'm going to basically talk kind of Wilcom language because I'm more familiar with that, but I've laid out the image of the underlay and what Wilcom, Pulse, and Design Shop label them as. On the top left, we have the center run, which is the most common. It just goes from one side to the other side and then back on top of itself. It's good for thin column stitches, and it's good like 1 millimeter to 1.5, 2 millimeters is going to have the center run. When you get wider, you might want an edge run, also known as contour or edge walk, and that just simply goes around the perimeter just slightly inside. And a lot of softwares you can adjust how far from the edge that is, and that can help it. If that edge run peeks through, you can just tuck it in a little more by changing the distance. Zigzag is great for when you start getting into knits, t-shirts, and stuff like that. You might want a little zigzag to just kind of hold down that fabric a little bit. The more movement, probably the more underlay you're going to need. And double zigzag is just same as a zigzag, except it goes a zigzag and then back on itself, kind of the flipped version, the other direction. And finally, the tatami or lattice or fill stitch, it's just the exact same stitch as the fill stitch that you're familiar with, except it's got an open spacing. And this will generally be like at a 45-degree angle or something like that. It'll be at an angle to, if you have the same direction as that fill stitch, it's not going to do anything for you. So you want it to be at an angle, and you can also do a crisscross, which we'll talk about a little later. So next slide. So with the design that we saw at the beginning, this is how I treated it. I first did a simple tack down fill stitch, open fill stitch, to just kind of lay that fabric flat, attach it to the backing and just to stabilize it. And second picture shows, it's not real clear, but basically I did another crisscross of fill stitch underneath that. And that's just to stabilize it. And it's a really open stitch. It's not a whole lot of stitching there. And let's go to the fourth image showing the ring. I did a zigzag just to once again stabilize it a little bit, and that's all it really needed. And then the final image. So next slide. And that's the sew out. And very little puckering, and it was very, very stretchy fabric. And it really, like Rich had written stuff, it really matters the stitch direction. You don't want to get all crazy with your stitch direction stuff, and doing that kind of tacking down the crisscross of the tatami stitch really helps, especially with stretchy fabric. X. And finally, this I call tack down. I'm sure everyone has a different name for it, but this is the fill stitch, but crisscrossed, and you all do this at the same color as a garment, and it'll tack down. It'll just push that fabric down for like fleece, towels. You can see on the top of the right-hand picture that these are exactly the same lettering. I didn't change that, and I just showed you one without the tack down, and the bottom one is with, and you can see how it just jumps up, and that pile isn't affecting it.
Thank you, Jesse.
So that's, yep.
And that will cover underlay and tack down for now. We're coming closer and closer to the end of our webinar, and we wanted to share some of the success stories that our digitizers have had with their customers. So I just want to take a minute to ask Lee and Jesse this turned into a kind of a nice discussion when we were practicing our webinar yesterday. But customer comes into your shop, they have a piece of art that they want digitized. Where do you start? How do you begin? You're talking to the experts now, so they can tell you how to approach it. And then after that, we'd like to take a look briefly, and maybe not so briefly, at some of the designs that Lee and Jesse and Rich have done.
I don't know who wants to go first, but Jesse?
I'll let you. Well, okay, I'll take it first. What I look for is first you look at the artwork, and you find out where it's going to give you an idea of the size limitations, because that's really important. Tackle that. I mean, can it be hooped in that area at the size you need it? So all that determines how much change you're going to have to require for the artwork. If your customer has a customer, have them, just communicate that, look at the design, indicate what you think may have to be changed, and make sure that's all okay. Lee?
When we talk about the art that's submitted by the customer, the better the artwork, the better the end product. The digitizer does not have to be an artist. If you are finding you're doing art instead of digitizing, you need to charge for it. If you don't get artwork that works and has to be sent out to an artist, charge for it. If the customer knows that there's going to be an extra charge, you would be surprised how fast they'll find really good artwork. But again, whatever the artwork is, that's going to determine the end product. So it has to be the best possible artwork to give the best possible end product. The hooping hoop size is necessary. Also, look at the number of colors. How many needles do you have on the machine? Or if you're the digitizer for a customer, how many needles do they have? If they don't have but 6 needles or 9 needles, you don't want to give them a design that's 14 colors. So that's one of the things to think about, as well as the hoop size. The main thing is that no matter what you're doing, when the person walks in, if they don't have art and they try and describe what they want, be very sure that you're getting all the information that's needed. I have one customer that is a digitizer that did a beautiful job on a jalapeno, 2 jalapenos in a heart shape to go on the back of a motorcycle jacket. Unfortunately, the customer asked for a ghost pepper. There's a huge difference between the two, both in color and in texture. When the digitizer produced the beautiful rendition of the 2 peppers on the back of the jacket, they were green, they weren't red, they were not ghost peppers, they were jalapenos, and the customer was not happy. So know what your customer wants. You're a lot of times getting information through someone else. Make sure it's accurate, and if at all possible, take that artwork, if it has to be reworked to make it feasible, send it back, let that person okay it before you do your work. There's nothing more frustrating than doing a beautiful job and finding out that the artwork didn't give you the information you needed to do an accurate job.
Lee, let's take a look at one of the challenges that was presented to you. This is a pretty amazing piece of embroidery. Makes me thirsty just looking at it.
This was sent to me by Coca-Cola. It was 72 DPI, and it was 1 inch high, and they needed a 10-inch Coca-Cola glass. Do not accept artwork that doesn't give you the information. I went back to marketing. They had nothing better. I was forced, and my background is fine art, I was forced to go to my original training and look at this as an artist would and put it together, even though I didn't have the information. No digitizer is supposed to have to do that. I had to blow this up big enough to get an idea of the shape. I then had to put ice in a glass and pour the drink into the glass. and then get an idea of the nuances of the color and go from there. I did not have artwork for this that was adequate, and I actually did not charge extra. However, on a custom piece like this, I do charge quite a bit, and I am the one that you go to when somebody says it can't be done, and my price reflects that. So Coca-Cola did pay a fair amount for it, and they got what they needed, and they used it not just on the jacket backs that they planned to use it on, but they used it on hats, on luggage tags, on everything you could imagine.
Thank you, Lee. This is a design that Rich Medcraft digitized. This would be an example of his also trying to take something that might have seemed impossible and shrinking it down through the use of 60 weight and 75 weight embroidery thread to something that was captured the detail that was originally brought to him. And I think it's just a very successful example of a corporate logo. This is another design similar to the first one. Rich is kind of a car guy. I think, Jesse, you are too. And so a lot of 60 weight thread went into doing for Portland swap meet this logo. Lee, we're
This
back.
one I can, this one I can talk about. This one went to Japan. They sent it back to the post office in Graceland 22 times. It had 28 colors for the stamp. It did not look like Elvis. It was 210,000 stitches. And at the time they sent it back, we only had 6 needle machines. So that meant if there were 28 cones of thread, that during the run with 210,000 stitches, you were constantly changing thread on the machine. That would be a disaster to run. It was going to be scrapped as a project, not because of that, not because it was going to be hard to run, but because it didn't look like Elvis. And at that time, nobody believed you could blend colors. So every color, every nuance of color was a blotch of color, and it looked like a Leroy Neiman print. When it came to us, the people at Game that were going to run this jacket needed help because the project was being scrapped. We had 6 hours between trade shows. I told the post office in Graceland that we would do it in 6 cones of thread, 6 colors, because that was the only way it would be feasible to run. I did it in 6 colors. I did it in 91,000 stitches. And I did it, for the most part, in the 6 hours that I had. I didn't do the background. I just showed him, I showed Elvis, his coat, his microphone, his hand, and sent it off, and the project went forward. But at that time, nobody felt you could blend colors on our embroidery machines. We asked why not. We pressed buttons we weren't supposed to press, and we made history doing it. The only thing I can say about this is that it forced us to think outside of the box. We now have better software, more advanced software. All of you that are watching and listening have advantages that my brother and I did not have when we first did this. But no matter what you learn, there's more to learn, there's more to experiment with, and with the new tools, you can take it even further than we have. So don't hesitate to get in there and experiment and see what you can do.
Thank you, Lee. This is another example of Rich Medcraft's work. Again, a corporate logo, incredible detail when you think that this circle is probably about 2.5 to 3 inches big. He was able to accomplish that with the use of 60 weight and probably some 75 weight thread. And next, let's take a look at something that Jesse did.
And this is a fullback, and I did this for a contest piece, and I wanted to focus on gradients. And so I've got like 3 or 4 different colors of reds, just a couple different colors of blues and stuff, and this was all about kind of using texture, angle, and stitch spacing to create a really nice blend. You can't really tell really well, but like even like the sign has the checkerboard is 2 different stitch directions, and it creates a nice look. I also like when I do blends or anything, I think of loft, and typically stitches that are vertical look a little more thicker and kind of bolder, like have a little higher volume than those that are horizontal. And so if something's in the background, I'll usually kind of go horizontal typically, and then vertical for the stuff that's in the foreground, such as the bumper and stuff.
Jesse, what was the original art that you worked from for this?
We worked from photograph and then some vector artwork for all the background stuff. We just kind of slapped something together.
Oh, it doesn't look slapped. It looks very, very 70s.
It's beautiful.
And then another one from Jesse.
And this one is a lot of you guys aren't going to be able to do this because you don't have a direct garment printer. The background was kind of a blurry background that I took a photograph, blurred it out, printed it on fabric, and then used that as an applique. And then I did a manual stitch direction in like the sky and the grass and stuff. And I just watched the length of that and tried to keep it about the same length, 5-6 millimeters long, and just had fun with it. Made one entire like kind of scribble, and it gave a really nice look. And the dragons on the inside was all about texture. Overlapping scales. I add a little extra underlay to get those scales to pop out, also with the fire on the left dragon. And this one was less about a whole bunch of different colors and more about what can I do with limited color palette, especially with the dragons.
Jesse, how many colors are in each dragon? Is it just a single color?
In this, 3, I think, but I did a version with it just 1, and it looks about the same.
Yeah.
Because I didn't really change the, just 2 on these, sorry. The yin yang symbol is printed, so I did another version where I did thread behind that, and that was the 3rd color for each dragon.
Seeing this up close from the picture that we had, you can certainly see how the different stitch directions built the texture that you were after. It really worked well. And back to shading, blending, and these puppies look like they're about ready for a walk. So, Lee, do you want to talk about these?
Actually, I think they both need to be pet. They look so sad.
And realistic.
Here you see a lot of texture, and of course this is, again, the blending technique that we're known for, but again, it is a light density fill. Because he's so shaggy, even the little areas of hair that are hanging down is still a fill rather than a satin stitch. Your satin stitch is going to be glossy, even if it's narrow, where you can make your fill as narrow as that satin stitch would be, but the needle penetrations, the arbitrary needle penetrations, are going to pull in the light and give you that matte texture that makes him look so, I'm not going to say he's scruffy, because he's actually pretty dapper, but it does give you the texture that you need, and the matte texture is established again through that light density fill.
And Lee, did you do any randomizing of the fill stitch to give it a little rougher texture or anything?
No, I did not.
Okay.
What I did was just go in close and copy what I saw in front of me, and it was, in some cases, painstaking because there's a lot of little hairs there, but the final outcome was worth it.
As much as this looks like a photograph, it's pretty amazing to see in reality. His eyes and his fur, very impressive. And
Thank you.
Jesse.
Okay, this is another blend one. This was, like, you can't really see, but I used a lot of texture on this. I used a lot of needle inputs to create some of the scale effect. I didn't do, like the dragon, I made each individual scale. In this case, I use needle penetration to delineate a lot of the scales and stuff. And this is all about like trying to get a realistic look with blends and stuff. I had a lot of fun with this. Even the satin stitch has a blend from a 3-color blend. And it was all about having fun with it. Another contest piece.
I thought I saw that someplace else in the pages of the magazine somewhere. All right, we're a little bit over time, but I think everybody understands why. There was a tremendous amount of material that we've asked 2 or 3 people to cover, and we asked 2 people to cover for the third, so we certainly appreciate that. I want to thank everybody that stuck through the webinar with us and remind them that we will be sending you an email. The email will contain links to this webinar if you'd like to see it. There'll be a link to the printable slides if you'd like to print these out. There'll be a link to our gallery of digitizers. I encourage you to take a look. If you are a digitizer or if you need one, that would be the place to go. And then 4 special offers, some regarding savings, some regarding a discount on further training. And I think that Lee and Jesse, thank you so much for your time. For all of the information that you shared with us, and we certainly consider ourselves lucky to have had you on this webinar today, so thank you both.
No problem.
Well, I think we both thank you for all of the work you and the crew, Morgan, Nancy, everybody put into making this happen.
Thank
You
you.
did an awesome job,
Yeah.
and I'm glad I was part of it.
Great.
It was a lot of work.
Thank you, Jesse and Lee. And for everyone that stayed with us, watch your email. We'll have everything to you so that if you'd like to revisit any of this and look at these wonderful, wonderful pictures, thank you again for your time. We appreciate it.